Welcome to Holy Kool-Aid Live. Thank you to everyone who's joining in to watch. I'm joined today by King Crocoduck, none other than the famous, infamous to some YouTuber. He is a physicist and he debunks all kinds of pseudoscience, whether it's from creationists or any kind of crazy, general uneducated public person who's making some claim, talking out of their butt about stuff that they don't know. And he's here to talk with me about a topic called he's had a series dealing with the science wars, and one of his videos that he made was on the new Lysenkoism, and another was on is science a social construct. And I want to dive into that and cover what was Lysenkoism, what's the history of that, as well as what were some of the pitfalls and dangers that happened because of it, and how can we avoid those dangers today. There are some storm clouds looming, and I want to do everything that we can to alert the general public that this is an issue, and at the same time maybe encourage people to think of this a little bit differently than how unfortunately a lot of people do. Welcome to the chat, King Crocoduck.
Thank you for having me.
It's great. It's a huge honor. So do you want to just tell our audience real quick what is exactly the new Lysenkoism? What was the old Lysenkoism first, and then we'll get into how the new Lysenkoism compares.
Sure. So during the Soviet Union, during the Stalinist era, there was a man named Trofim Lysenko, and he was an agricultural scientist. He had very little formal education. As far as I understand, he wasn't even literate till he was 13. Grew up from a very poor family. But he fit a certain profile. Of course, the Soviet Union was all about glorifying the proletariat, ostensibly. So he fit a certain profile, a certain demographic profile, and he also said things that were endearing to the dominant system. He made claims about agriculture and genetics, which we know now are completely wrong. For instance, he completely dismissed the idea of the gene, believing it to be a bourgeois construct, and introduced a new revolutionary agriculture. And some of the features of this, there were these kind of quasi-mystical features to it. He sort of combined Stalinist dogma with a peasant farmer folk tales, and a kind of new Lamarckism, the belief in the heritability of acquired characteristics.
So it wasn't Mendelian genetics. It wasn't heritability by genes passing down traits.
Yeah, no. He thought that the concept of genes was developed by bourgeois scientists in order to justify domination of the proletariat by the bourgeoisie.
So kind of like you have Western science and Eastern science.
That's... Yes, he absolutely loathed Western science. He would rail against it all the time. And he very quickly, he brown-nosed his way to the top of the hierarchy. Stalin would even commission people to play a song that was written in his honor every time he came up to speak. Whenever he spoke, Stalin would stand up and, clap and say, "Bravo, Comrade Lysenko." So what was it that Lysenko did that made Stalin so happy? Well, he introduced this new superior Soviet agriculture based upon Soviet values rather than this degenerate Western capitalist values. And one of the most disastrous policies that he'd introduced was something called close cropping. What you would do is you would take seeds of crops and you would put them ridiculously closely together when you plant them. And the idea was you could invest the minimum amount of soil and the minimum amount of water. And these seeds, which belong to the same class of plants, they're going to naturally cooperate because nature is naturally cooperative instead of competitive, as Darwin had held. Mm-hmm. He believed that Darwin's
the opposite of natural selection.
Yes, he thought that natural selection was it was at least partly inspired by Malthus, but Lysenko thought that because it had been inspired by this reactionary Malthusian ideas, this ran contrary to the truth of communism. So he dismissed that entirely and instead believed in natural cooperation between these organisms. That's not to say that nature doesn't have any cooperation. Of course, there are symbiotic relationships. But the way Lysenko conceived of it was you could plant these crops really closely together, invest the minimum amount of water, minimum amount of soil, and they would mimic the Soviet system. They would equally distribute the water and soil. and this would maximize crop yields.
But
So,
like the Soviet system, it ultimately failed.
of course, it turns out, nature does not care about what your politics are. There were severe shortages. It severely exacerbated the famines that took place as a consequence of the disastrous collectivization policies that were in place. And scientists who spoke out against Lysenko, my great grandfather on my maternal grandmother's side was one of these scientists. They were thrown in jail, or worse, the less lucky ones were killed. They were shot.
Yeah, I had a conversation with someone the other day. It was a creationist was shooting me Facebook messages and trying to convince me that the Soviet Union and all of the massive amounts of deaths that occurred were a direct result of science. And my response to that was, I studied international studies as well as Russian. Like I studied Russian language, Russian culture, Russian history, and to me, hearing that, I was like, that's absolute horseshit. If anything, it was the denial of science and the denial of the scientific method, and it was the intellectuals that were the first to go. They were the ones that ended up in the gulag first. It was the scientists who spoke up against the system who were silenced and imprisoned and killed.
Yeah, that's an accurate
It sounds
assessment.
like you said it was your grandfather or great grandfather.
Great grandfather.
Well,
yeah, he was taken. Yeah, he was taken to prison for a short time. He refused to cooperate with the system. I don't remember the details. I'd have to ask my grandmother. It had something to do with the manner in which horses were used and how horses were allocated. But he was released shortly afterward when World War II broke out. At that point, he was kind of needed, so they gave him a reprieve. But a lot of people were not so lucky. There was a guy called Vasilov, something of an agricultural hero in the Soviet Union, especially as it pertains to the blockade of Leningrad. I won't go into detail.
Nikolai Vavilov?
Yeah,
Didn't they stored seeds or something?
Yes. There were some heroic scientists who did not eat those seeds when they could have, and they starved to death. But I'll leave people to read on that. I don't want to get too sidetracked.
I'm putting, by the way, to anyone who wants his King Crocoduck's video on this topic, I have in the description below. So when you're done watching this video, definitely go check it out. Dude, it blows my, like, watching how much research and effort and time you put into your videos. Like, if anyone's not subscribed to you already and is watching this, they need to go and do that, because it's like mad props to you. That I know how much work it takes to do stuff like that, and I'm very impressed.
Yeah, thanks for the kind words.
My videos are like 5 minutes long, and yours are like half an hour, and they're way better. But
well, they're labors of love. I will say that.
Kind of back to the topic, Lysenkoism. So as a result of it, millions of people starved because these plants weren't able to, they're competing for nutrients in the soil. And so, obviously your crop yield is abysmal compared to, what was yielded throughout, the Western countries, in Europe and the United States. But it didn't stop there, didn't it continued with China?
No, it did not stop there. Yes, Mao, he implemented Lysenko's 8-point agricultural plan in, I believe, 1968. This was during the Great Leap Forward, which had started a few years prior to that, I think.
It's a bit of an oxymoron.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact year that the Great Leap Forward started, but when it started, with the collectivization policies and these massive rounding up of potential housebreakers and killing them, this already caused millions of people to die. But if you look at the graph of the deaths that took place during the Great Leap Forward, you will see that at the point when Lysenkoism was introduced, the number jumped from several million by another several million. There's a sharp triangle inside of the graph of deaths. I don't have it available. I don't remember where I saw it. I'm going to be posting it in a future video. But the general estimates for the number of deaths that Lysenko was responsible for overall, it converges on approximately 30 million.
Wow. And now that's, it sounds like you've posted in a lot of your videos um, images and clips of people in science classrooms saying, oh, science is just subjective, it's a social construct, the science for, men and women is different, the science for, blacks and Mexicans is different. Do you want to go into that a little bit?
Sure. So there are two senses in which a person can mean that science is a social construct. There's a weak kind of social constructionism, and then there's a strong social constructionism, which people will hide behind the weak one while pretending, they'll pretend they hold to the weak one, whereas they really hold to the strong one. As a kind of bait and switch there. So the weak social constructionism says that science is a social activity. It takes place among social actors within a society. Human beings are not 100% objective. They are a little bit biased, which is why certain regulations need to be put in place. Peer review, double blinding, meta-analyses, things like this. And they'll point to things, social influences on general practices regarding the funding of sciences. How urgently is this science funded in relation to that one? How are grant proposals prepared, taking into account who the audience is of this grant proposal to these various organizations that will give out grant money. How do you get investors to scientific activity? And these are all social situations. So that's the weak social constructionism, and there's no controversy as to whether this takes place. The weak social constructionist will acknowledge that the social situation of the scientist, if they're practicing the science, is not going to affect the outcome of the science being done. This is different from the strong social constructionist view. The people who will loudly and proudly proclaim that science is a social construct, these are the people you want to be suspicious of for holding to the strong view, even if they will do the Mott and Bailey, this bait and switch, and try to retreat to the weak version. The strong social constructionism holds that a person's social identity is paramount to the results that their research is going to produce. That the standards for what constitutes good science they reflect the argument for what exactly it reflects will vary from social constructionist to social constructionist. Some will employ interpretivism, some will employ psychoanalysis, some will employ standpoint theory, and others will employ deconstructionism. But what they're all saying is that scientific theories are laden with the values that are specific to the scientist's demographic. And this view is what I call the new Lysenkoism. They are saying, as Lysenko did, that the conclusions of a scientific theory, like evolution, they exist as a consequence of whoever developed it, of their social situation. So Darwin, being a capitalist, employed capitalist assumptions into his model, and that there are equally valid, or indeed better, sciences that you can create by employing other people's perspectives, as with Lysenkoism and employing socialism instead.
So an example of that would be like creationists who say that, we look at the evidence and we come to a 6,000-year-old Earth. You look at the evidence, you come to, a several billion-year-old Earth. We see a bunch of water and we conclude that there was a flood. You see a bunch of water and you conclude that it was, brought by asteroids bombarding the Earth or wherever.
Yes.
What are some of the problems with that?
Yeah, creationists will employ this all the time. They'll say we're all looking at the same evidence but interpreting it differently. And I speak about this at some point in my most recent video. There's a phenomenon called underdetermination, and it's a property of scientific theories. A scientific theory is an entire collection of facts. It's an entire network of facts that are organized in a certain manner. And if you change the manner in which these facts are organized in terms of how they contextualize one another and what relates to what, you change the character of the theory, and you change the kinds of predictions that it's going to make. But there are some cases where you have different models which organize the facts a little bit differently, but they both have the same predictive power. They are both, as the creationist says, looking at the same evidence but interpreting it differently. So as an example, if you take the issue of violent video games and aggressive behavior, if you have a single there's a correlation between violent video games and aggressive behavior, you can either interpret this to mean that violent video games are going to cultivate aggressive behavior, or more aggressive people are going to naturally tend toward violent video games. And just on the basis of that one study, on its face, neither of those conclusions, neither of these models have any particular advantage over the other. So it's at this point where you have to start looking at other things as well. You know, what are some of the background propositions? What are the more general features of the models that these conclusions are situated in? What are the general predictive powers of those more broader, more general models? Is there conciliance between the background propositions associated with these and the theories that they are emergent from? Is there greater explanatory efficiency? You know, it's basically Occam's razor. Are any one of these employing assumptions that are not necessarily justified? So there are a number of metrics you could use to argue for whether one model is better than the other. So in the case of creationism, you can point to science's superior predictive power. It's able to explain more without employing all kinds of nonsense that there's no justification for. You don't have to engage in any kind of special pleading like, oh, the laws of physics were different, the speed of light changed, blah 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 blah.
You mean God didn't hide dinosaur fossils at different parts of the geological layers to test our faith?
Yeah. It's Occam's razor that decides it in that case. There's also the problem of falsifiability. That's very important. If the model is not falsifiable, it's not science.
Yeah. Now,
of deciding.
So a theory like evolution, obviously, like the more you study it across, every single possible scientific field, you find experiment after experiment that has been performed that confirms this theory. And there might be elements of it, so we know that animals are, evolving over time to fit their environments, but there might be different theories that are an explanation of how. But we know that they're evolving. We know that they're changing, and then we can test those models, those hypotheses, to see which ones actually support the data, which ones does the data support. Obviously, something like do video games cause people to be more violent? It's a little bit harder to test, but with new theories, like we have, for example, we have loop quantum gravity and we have string theory and we have various competing theories when it comes to like quantum physics, but those are all falsifiable, and hopefully as our instruments get better and as our tools get better, we're going to have ways to falsify them and to figure out which model is correct. Is that right?
Sure. And as I said, there are other metrics as well, but yeah, that's broadly correct.
So we're going to open up here in just a minute to one of the things I like to do with these chats is open up the Hangout to my patrons to come in and join in the conversation if they have questions, or if you guys are in the chat right now and you have a question that you just want me to read off, and for either me or for King Crocoduck, just do a super chat, and any level we'll try to get to all of them. So just super chats we'll read off. And if you're a patron, just shoot me a message and we'll give you the link and you can actually join in this conversation. We had someone join last time when I was talking with Steve McRae. We'd love to get you guys in here. This is not an opportunity that you want to miss. King Crocoduck is kind of a legend in the YouTube atheist scene. So yeah, when you talk about the new Lysenkoism, do you think that there's actually a problem of, now we have an era of alternative facts? We have people who are saying, denying climate change. We have all kinds of craziness that's going on. Where do you think that this will lead us? Do you think that we're in danger of something as crazy as Lysenkoism that led to worldwide famine? Do you think it's just a couple of idiots that are going to be, ignored, like the Westboro Baptist Church, in a way that they're making a big stir, but they don't actually, their bark is louder than their bite?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because there actually are real consequences to this, and they have already begun to manifest. There was a drug on the market not too long ago called Addy, and it billed itself as a cure to solutions to the problem with female libido. You know, some women have very low libido, or libido. I don't know how to pronounce it. I think is it libido or libido?
I've always said libido.
Sorry.
It's okay. They say never make fun of someone for mispronouncing a word because they probably learned it by reading.
Yeah. Well, libido. Some women have very low libido, and there have been problems with getting the research together to create a drug that's able to take care of this problem. But we have drugs on the market that are able to help men. You have things like Viagra. So there was a lot of noise being made, a lot of protesting going on, saying, "Hang on, why are men given these libido correcting drugs?" And you know, there's no libido correcting drug for women. Why isn't the research being done for women? The answer is libido is much easier to deal with than female libido. Female libido is principally a consequence of what's going on neurologically, is much more difficult to tackle. Whereas for men, if you want to cure, it's a much easier process, and it needs a lot less funding.
Mm. So it's more
this drug
physiological than psychological.
So this drug called Addy was developed. It said that this is the female libido pill. And the Food and Drug Administration rejected it, and it rejected it over and over and over again. The studies that were published on it were very bad. The control groups, the groups who it was tested on, were entirely men, who, as you may know, do not typically suffer from female libido problems. There was almost no increase in sexual ability. I believe even when they did test it on women, if they did, I don't remember if they did. I'll have to check. Whatchamacallit? There were other problems with it. When mixed with alcohol, it would cause a person to black out, just pass out and lose and forget about what happened. So effectively, Addy is a date rape drug, and the FDA rejected it. And there were a bunch of hit pieces. There was a very aggressive campaign led by the National Organization of Women, which published some research which cited some of these social constructionists, some of these people who are saying that there's a male science and a female science. And they're saying, this is another example of how male scientists are contriving all of these bullshit reasons to prevent women from getting what they need.
Wait, but isn't it in a male's best interest for a girl to have a high libido?
They're not paying attention. They're unhappy. They were unhappy. The people petitioning for Addy to make it to the market. Mm-hmm. They were unhappy that it didn't pass FDA approval. They didn't care about the reasons. They didn't care about the motives. It's, we didn't get what we want. Whereas men have all of these Viagra stuff at their disposal. So this must be due to institutional sexism, and it must be because scientists are the assumptions that they're incorporating into their models. These are fundamentally male and masculine assumptions, and they want to, low female libido is good because women are basically baby machines, and the less horny they are, the less likely they are to cheat on a man. Bullshit along this line. And after all of this pressure, the FDA finally caved. And for several months in America, Addy was on the market. They eventually stopped. After a few months, the FDA, it came to light, hey, it turns out that there is something dangerous about this. There's none of this masculine versus feminine science at play. This thing is a fucking date rape drug, and you pressured the FDA to cave and allow this thing to go through. So that's one of several examples in recent years of the sort of thing that this has caused.
Yeah,
there's a more comprehensive discussion of this incident by the YouTuber Teal Deer. So
now, what about the whole vaccines and autism? Would that be another example of people saying, well, oh, your science is just being suppressed. It's not, science doesn't.
Yes. Whenever people are talking about big pharma and how scientists are, they're operating under a particular bias, in order to get funding from big pharma, that's a charge of scientific corruption. I'd say it's a little bit distinct from Lysenkoism and New Lysenkoism in the sense that it's not talking about the scientist's socially situated bias. It's not because of the manner in which the science was socialized or the color of the skin of the scientist or anything like that. It's because the scientist is incentivized by these particular material incentives. So that would be a little bit different, but it's also very troubling. It's also a problem.
Okay. Yeah, it seems to me like, you have people on the one hand who are, who are completely disregarding science and saying, oh, I was talking with someone on, I think it was there's a YouTuber, Mouthy Buddha, and I was in a debate I was pitted against 3 creationists. That was fun. And one of the things that he brought up, and he said it so quickly and then just moved on, and like afterwards I was shooting myself in the foot for not calling him out on it. But I basically said, there's an excellent quote by Ricky Gervais where he says, if you take everything in religion and you destroy it, 1,000 years from now, none of that will be back. It'll all be different stuff. But if you take everything in science and you destroy it, 1,000 years from now, all that stuff is going to be the same because all the tests are going to yield the same results. And I said that to him, and he basically was like, actually, no, we'll come up with different results for different things and stuff. And I just I was kind of sitting there with my mouth open, and then they moved on to something else. And I was like, I wanted to call him out so badly and be like, no, that's not how science works. Like, there's scientific facts that we can test, that we know, like every single time that you throw a ball in a particular way with a particular amount of force, it's going to have the same trajectory if it's in a vacuum or something. And, assuming you're doing it on the same planet. But, it really got to me. And so when I saw your video talking about this, and you had those graphs where you'd have like a bunch of different dots all backing up one theory, and it's like every single one of these results we can replicate, we can do them again and again and again and again, and they're going to yield the same exact result. We can make predictions, like with LIGO, how we were able to predict decades ago the existence of gravity waves, and then we're able to build this massive instrument and test it, and we detect them, and then we detect them in the visual spectrum at the same time that we're detecting the gravitational waves at the same time. So I wish I could go back to that chat, but do you think that there's what is the difference? You talked about a little bit in one of your videos about how you have people oftentimes will say, oh, Newtonian physics was replaced by general relativity, but it wasn't replaced. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure, and it's a common misconception pertaining to paradigm shifts. It's a term invented by Thomas Kuhn in his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which I discuss in my videos, and how social constructionists frequently abuse this. And of course, creationists abuse it in the same manner, especially intelligent design advocates. What actually ended up happening was that the background propositions pertaining to Newtonian mechanics, which included things like the constancy of space and time, these were reoriented. They were either reoriented or removed entirely, or had a new background proposition added in. And this affected the first order propositions, the propositions pertaining directly to the theory, which in turn changed its structure. And this was the new paradigm of general relativity. And the reason why it didn't really replace Newtonian physics is Newtonian physics applies within a certain regime. It applies within a certain domain, and within that regime, it's correct. But it's not able to tackle things outside of that regime. You have to employ general relativity in order to get a more general picture. And where the confusion,
like on large scales, like when measuring planetary movement and whatnot.
Yes, but here's the key, and here's where a lot of people go wrong, including, unfortunately, Kuhn himself. general relativity and Newtonian mechanics are not completely incommensurable. They are not completely incoherent in terms of one another, not completely incomprehensible in one another's terms. It is the case that you cannot arrive at general relativity from Newtonian physics. Whatever general relativity talks about, Newtonian physics can't touch it. But the things that Newtonian physics does talk about, general relativity is able to touch it. You are able to derive, basically, you are able to derive, for example, the law of gravity, the Newtonian version of gravity, from general relativity, even if you can't do it the other way around.
So it's like one is more refined, a later, better adapted version, but it's...
Yes. One is a generalization of the other. One is able to account for all of the same phenomena plus the anomalous phenomena of that had plagued the previous one.
Mm-hmm.
So the paradigm shift is not just this arbitrary, okay, we're going to use that picture and then we're going to jump to this other picture, and that there's no real progress. It's an expansion of our scientific knowledge.
So it'd be like it's like improving our theories is like improving our instruments. The more that we learn, the more the better tools that we come up with. It's not that everything that we had before is necessarily completely thrown out. It's just like, oh, hey, instead of the answer being, 10,084, it's 10,084.00001 or something. We're getting a better answer. Would that be somewhat accurate? Or
yeah, that's reasonably fair. That is a reasonably fair assessment.
Okay. Does anybody have questions in the chat? Feel free to post super chats, or if you want to become a patron, you can join the conversation. Heck, if you want to join the conversation, I'll let super chatters in if you'd like. So if you want the link, just post your Twitter handle or something, or a way that I can message you, and a super chat, and we'll open this up and you can join this conversation. I really want to have more conversations like this and bring, more and more people in. And then, it gives my audience, because a lot of people, if I bring a guest on, they may be, seem completely this unreachable out there, and but they may want to have a conversation with you. And so like, I'd love to have tons of guests over the years, and actually allow any of my patrons or supporters to actually participate in the conversation. Is kind of my way of giving back to you guys who support me. Steve wrote, "Dog produced dogs. Checkmate atheists, Kent Hovind."
Yes.
Steve, I can let you in the chat, but I had you in my last one.
I don't mind. Steve and I are buddies.
We can bring him in. But if it starts to get crowded, then we'll let some other people in too. But we should be able to. Steve has proven time and again with the Great Debate community that he can have like 20 people in a Google Hangout, and somehow he makes them all behave.
Yes.
So yeah, no, you're welcome to join, Steve, if you'd like. Let me look at some of these questions. I think someone asked before, do you have any plans to do any other debates? I know that you debated with, was it Kent Hovind?
Yeah. I debated him 3 times on my channel.
How did you feel about that?
It was frustrating, but it's an experience I'm happy that I had. And my audience was certainly happy to
Well, you didn't go into it assuming that you were going to change his mind, did you?
No. He lives and breathes this stuff. It's his cash cow. But he went to prison for it, so he's going to be even more invested. It's like, what? I didn't waste 10 years of my life. No, I went in mostly just to have a good time and maybe help illustrate how Hovind's mistakes can be used in a kind of pedagogical way. My videos are not really geared toward changing the minds of the people I address. It's for my audience. It's to have an oppositional kind of pedagogy. It's to say, okay, here's a pronouncement on science. Here's why it's wrong, and here are all of the scientific principles you need to know in order to understand why it's wrong. That's basically my bread and butter. Well,
one of the things that you kept bringing up with him was you were talking about, blue shifting and of like stars that are traveling, and how the light stretches, kind of like the Doppler shift with sound. And he didn't seem like he was able to wrap his head around that. There was about an hour where y'all were sticking to that one topic, and you were trying to explain the basic physics behind it. And you're a physicist, right? You're at the graduate level.
Yeah.
So this stuff you eat, breathe, and sleep on a regular basis.
Pretty much. And as I recall, he actually did employ this abuse of underdetermination. He did say at some point that we're all looking at the same redshift, but interpreting it differently. And in the third debate, there was this nonsense about jelly donuts. I don't even want to go into it.
How do you look at the same redshift and interpret it differently?
He wasn't entirely clear on that.
By not understanding.
Oh wait, no, never mind. He said God stretched out the heavens, and that's how you explain the redshift. And
so you stretch out the photons too. And
yeah, well, if you want to be very, very charitable to Hovind, you could say that this is his interpretation, and that neither of our models have any particular advantage over the other. Except mine actually is falsifiable. His has whatchamacallit. His is not efficient in its explanation. It requires all manner of assumptions. Mine just uses known physical principles. So what else? There's.
So how does he explain the fact that the heavens are stretching out at an ever increasing rate, that they're accelerating?
I don't know. I didn't hear his explanation of that.
So I find that kind of hard to, it's okay. So God stretched out the heavens. You've got all these stars that are, stretched away, which causes, the Doppler shift. Do you call it Doppler shift when it's light, or what do you? Because Doppler shift is with sound.
Yeah, I prefer to just say redshift.
Redshifting. Okay, yeah. Redshifting and blue shifting would be blue shifting be as they're coming closer.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and then redshifting.
When they come closer, the wavelengths get squished together, and when they are moving away from each other, the waves are being stretched.
Okay, so how are we able to tell? So and this is something I've always wondered: is it when you're looking up at a star through like a spectrograph, and you're able to tell, oh, it's made up of this much methane, this much oxygen, hydrogen, carbon, whatever, through a spectroscope. Obviously, those various elements have certain signatures. So like they'll have spikes at different points, depending on what they're composed of. Is it just that those signatures are just moved slightly to the left and slightly to the right, and we know what they're made out of? But if it's traveling at the speed of light, it should be in one place. Or
sorry, could you repeat the question?
I'm trying to understand, like, how do we know? So the light is red shifted and blue shifted, but how do we know what it's supposed to look like if it's that far away and traveling at the speed of light, if it's not expanding? Like, do we have a baseline to measure it from?
So what are we speaking of specifically, like supernovae or galaxies? Because when you're looking at distant astronomical objects, you can use spectroscopy to determine what are its constituent chemical elements. Mm-hmm. If you know what chemistry is going on, you can understand the physical processes that are taking place.
And you can test that with elements here on Earth to compare the outputs.
Yeah, and I discuss, and I'm also doing a series on quantum theory. So I got a video called Quantum Theory Made Easy, Part 2, which discusses how every individual element has its own unique fingerprint, and the underlying reasons for this. So you can determine where these fingerprints are located on a light spectrum, and you can compare that to what it looks like when it's redshifted, and you can see that those lines, those spectral lines, are moved a little bit in this direction or moved a little bit in that direction. And so you can say, okay, it should look like so and so because these are the chemicals that are pertaining to it. But instead, we can see it moved a little, and depending on how much it moves, you can say, okay, it's redshifted by this much, and from that we can calculate
how fast it's moving.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was wondering because I've seen the output of certain elements through like RSpec, right, which is a software program, where you'll have like various spikes and stuff, and to give a particular signature of the element that you're observing. So if you're like looking at oxygen, it'll look a little different than hydrogen. Um, but is there a point where it becomes almost impossible to, like, let's say that you have 50 different elements that are all hitting your instrument at the same time? Wouldn't it just look like absolute chaos? Like it's like when I do a lot of audio editing, and I might have one sine wave. You can obviously tell what it is, but once you have like a voice and an instrument and sound effects and all this stuff, it just looks like a muddled mess, like a blob.
Yeah, there can be noise, but if you take what spectral lines you expect of a particular element and you superimpose, you can use this kind of process of elimination. Oh, these spectral lines show up in a place that don't correspond to so and so element. So this particular line over here doesn't correspond to this element. So we can and through this kind of process of elimination, in principle, this can be used. Although these days, I think spectral scientists who deal with this kind of thing, they have more advanced techniques for separating out the noise.
I know too. It's different when you're trying to measure it, here on Earth versus from a satellite.
Sorry.
From um, like when you're trying to measure it from here on Earth, you have to kind of get a baseline for what are you picking up from the atmosphere itself,
Uh-huh.
and then calibrate your instruments, to get rid of that noise before you measure.
Or you can get rid of the atmosphere problem entirely and send your telescopes into space.
That's what I was saying. Like it's different when you're measuring it from space because you don't have to do that calibration.
Yeah, yeah. The Keck Observatory. I like that name, Keck. on Mauna Kea. I
Is it a
believe it's on.
frog that runs it?
Yes, yes. I believe it's on Mauna Kea. It's in Hawaii.
Mhm.
If you just look up KECK telescopes and look for pictures of it in the nighttime, you'll see that they are shooting lasers into the sky, and they are doing this in order to make corrections for the distortion effects produced by the atmosphere. So, yeah, there are always going to be all kinds of noise that get in the way, and you have to be able to accommodate that.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that, like, I don't think is communicated well in schools is that science isn't just a bunch of guesses. It's not just like, oh, I see this data, I kind of think that this might be what's going on. They're performing experiments like that, and they're taking into consideration, okay, what kind of noise is going to jack with our data? What kind of things are going to corrupt the data that we have for this experiment, and how can we go around them? How can we actually um, have an experiment that is we can replicate anywhere, and we can do, and that there's an entire mechanism in place of peer review and making a clinical trial double blind, and different ways that you can analyze the results of an observational study to try to get rid of any biases that you might have. And I don't think that that's taught well.
Yeah,
Are there
yeah.
ways that we can teach science better? Is there some type of solution to this, or is it left to us YouTubers to try to educate the general public?
The trouble is, you want people to be scientifically literate. You want them to be able to understand, what are the conclusions of science, and that's very difficult in and of itself. It would be ideal if you could also cultivate in them an understanding of the scientific process and of the scientific way of thinking instead of just having them. I mean, I don't want in high school classrooms, for instance. There's a lot of memorization going on, and of course, you do need to be able to memorize things in order to be able to do science. Um, but the emphasis, it's ideally, there are obviously time constraints when it comes to the classroom, and there's problems in funding and so on in public education systems, and there has to be some work around there. And plus, you really want to get as many students as possible to graduate, so you make the courses, less thought oriented to a certain extent, especially in public schools. There's a huge mess, huge incentives to push dumb students to the top, push them to graduation. You want your school to get the funding. So I would say that in terms of prioritizing how we think about science, or teaching how we ought to think about science, that unfortunately is probably not going to change anytime soon.
Well, and the fact that schools are in a way graded on standardized testing results rather than are these kids actually learning how to think. Because
yeah,
I,
yeah, but
did experiments that I did in high school were in chemistry class, and I had a chemistry kit, and I tried a couple things out, but I wasn't really taught that like everything that we're taught in science class, everything that we're taught about how the universe works, there's reasons that we've gotten to those conclusions. There's ways that you can go out and you can learn that. You can see it, you can observe it, you can test it. And this stuff has all stood up, to scrutiny for decades or centuries to give us this foundation. But the foundation itself isn't science. Science isn't that collection of facts that you just have to memorize and go through some rote learning process. Science is taking these basic assumptions and going back and being like, how do we know that? Like, can we test that? Can we observe it? What does that tell us about the world? Let's make predictions. Let's test those predictions. Like, it's a method, a methodology. And I don't think that really hit me until probably one of my last years in college, or even after college, where it really sank in that like, oh man, like this is how that works. Like, this is how we discover this stuff. And
yes, there's a virtue, there's curiosity that you have to cultivate in people. And it doesn't always come naturally. A lot of the time it does, but not always. A lot of the time it doesn't. So there's a component of a person's individual character at play. It's as I said, there are all these obstacles when it comes to teaching science in the schools, in teaching them in a manner that would really get people to appreciate what's going on. So yeah, I agree with you.
What was your background like? Were you brought up religious? Were your parents in some type of scientific field? Did you have any experience with this growing up, or did you just kind of fall in love with science along the way and decide you wanted to study it?
Well, I came from a secular Jewish family, and they had my parents came here in the '90s from the former Soviet Union. My dad was he was in university to get an engineering degree at the time, and my mother was also in university trying to get a biochemistry degree. And neither of them could complete it because everything went to shit, and they had to come here, and they ended up not becoming scientists. So I think to a certain extent, they tried to vicariously live the lives they could have had through me by really, buying me all these things that would get me interested in science. And it worked.
Well, it seems like it worked. Yeah. Ты говоришь по-русски или нет?
Yeah. Да, я говорю по-русски.
Oh,
У
свободно?
меня есть отличительный.
Okay,
What?
we're
What's
going
up?
to carry on the rest of this chat in Russian then.
Yes. I swear we're not talking about the election. Трампа и Хиллари. Мы все поебнулся.
Очень много деньги.
Да, много денег на
We'll start talking about politics and see if we can get the CIA or the NSA to tune into this chat. Maybe they'll give us a like. Hey, by the way, give us a like if you're watching this video right now.
Yeah. And NSA, if you're watching, check out my Science Wars video series.
It's for all the craziness going on every single year by Fox News about the war on Christmas, nobody seems to bat an eye when there's millions of pseudoscientists waging war on science, except for King Crocoduck.
Yeah. They're the assholes who keep me up at night.
What is your biggest frustration? Is it the anti-vaxxers, the creationists? What pseudoscientific claim do you find the most just insufferable?
That's interesting. I'm not entirely certain. I think there's a measure. I have a measure of annoyance with all pseudoscientific claims. There's a lot of pseudoscience pertaining to Holocaust denial. Michael Shermer has a very good book called Denying History that I recommend to people. So that is a particularly irritating one.
It's interesting that you bring that up because my grandfather was actually a World War II veteran, and he liberated Nazi death camps. And
really?
I remember when I was a kid, he took me into this room, and he's like, I don't know how much longer I'm gonna live. I wanted to show you this when you were older, because it's really graphic. And he never talked to me about his experiences, just because he had a lot of PTSD and trauma from the war. But I remember going through his stuff and finding like a bronze star and like a bunch of he had like a sword from an Italian officer that had surrendered to him. But he took me into this room, and he basically pulled out these pictures that he'd taken, and they were of basically stacks of bodies that were in a Jewish concentration camp. They had come in to deliver them from this camp, and the Nazis were going to kill them off, but apparently they had to flee, and so they left a bunch of them alive. And so my grandfather gave up, and him and his squad mates, or whatever you call them, gave up their meal that day to feed them. But he had pictures of, there were just stacks of dead bodies, just stripped naked, completely skin and bones, piles and piles and piles of them. And he looked at me, and he's like, he had like tears in his eyes, and he's like, I didn't want to show you this till you were older, but like, you need to see this. Like, I took this picture. And I could just, like, you can tell in that kind of moment, this is a man who, for decades, I'm sure he's heard all kinds of crazy Holocaust deniers, and he's like, I was fucking there. And I remember hearing a story of him he worked at a newspaper as an editor, and he showed up one day, and there was this young guy who's like, the Holocaust never happened, Hitler did nothing wrong, yada yada yada. And he just like kept his mouth shut. And then he showed up the next day, and he's like, I took these pictures, like, don't tell me it wasn't real. And the guy just like just shut him up instantly, and he was like, I'm so sorry. Like, how do you respond to that? So yeah, Holocaust denial for sure has got to be up there.
Yes, it's one of the less palatable pseudosciences. Well, pseudo history, historical revisionism, they'll call it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not really my field, so I can't speak much about it. There is an excellent YouTube channel whose name is the same as Shermer's book. It's called Denying History, and he goes after both extremes. He goes after people like Stalin apologists who pretend that the Holodomor was not the result of Soviet policy. The Holodomor was the name of the 1932 to 1933 famine that killed something like 15 million people. He goes after deniers like that, and he also goes after deniers on the right, people who say, Hitler did nothing wrong. So
unfortunately, we're seeing a massive resurgence in that kind of stuff.
Yes, and on both sides too at the same time. So it's an unfortunate time.
Yeah. Or someone wrote the one that really gets me is Sandy Hook.
Yes, Miles Power. I don't know if you're familiar with his channel. He just did an excellent debunking of Alex Jones on the Sandy Hook thing.
Or Pizzagate. The dangerous thing with that was somebody actually, burst into the pizza joint with a loaded weapon, demanding to see where they keep the children, and almost got, some innocent pizza person killed as a result of it. But then again, apparently Snopes is just a left-wing propaganda machine, right? And CNN's all fake news.
Yeah. Well, I would say that all news is fake to a certain degree. Ideally, people would look at the original sources. They would look at the original briefing, or they would listen to the original speech. But nobody has time for that. I mean, even the most ardent political junkie can't sit and watch C-SPAN for 50 hours. They got to take a piss at some point, and in those 50 hours, they're gonna miss everything everybody else is saying. They're gonna miss all the So it's a very tricky situation.
There's an amazing book on that. What were you saying?
Oh, I was just going to suggest that if people want to be able to navigate a world that is contaminated by fake information, um, the best thing to do is to adopt a plurality of news sources, something from the hard left, something from the hard right, center left, center right, and then moderate left, moderate right. Draw from a variety of sources and see how much consilience there is, how much they agree upon in terms of just the raw information. Um, if it's if it's very difficult to read through a particular briefing or listen to a speech, just read all of these different sources, and it'll give you a broad outline of what's going on.
It'll help you find some of the signal and the noise too.
Yeah.
There's an amazing book on this topic called "Trust Me, I'm Lying" by Ryan Holiday,
Mhm.
and he's basically a media market manipulator. And so he works for companies like American Apparel, and he tries to do you know to promote the brand as well as defend its reputation. But one of the things that he found through working for years in the industry was that it's all manipulated. Like, you'll see these sensational news stories on BuzzFeed and Gizmodo and Salon, and like these most of these sources that we think are, oh, this is a news site, it's all yellow journalism, because it's not a subscription based model. They're paid through ads, and so they have a bunch of bloggers who their incentive is to write as many viral articles as they can, and they're testing the most clickbaity titles, and they might have they're split testing. They're doing A/B testing where they'll test one and another, and whichever one gets more, they go with that one, and then they'll test a couple of others, and so you can completely throw any kind of nuance out the window because they're going for sensationalism. And it's because every single click is more ads generated, is more revenue. So they're just trying to get millions and millions of views. And he compares it to in the 1800s, before there were subscription based news sources, every single issue had to be sensational like that, because it'd be like extra extra, we've got some the Pope had an affair with the Queen or something, and they're trying to get people's attention. And the solution back then was you had newspapers like the New York Times come along and start charging on a subscription basis. So you'd pay a certain amount per month, and then they didn't have to worry about trying to sell each issue. They actually could spend the money to research each article and put out good news that wasn't yellow journalism. And I think we're starting to see that, where you have certain if you go to like the New York Times website, or you go to some of the more legitimate news sources, they'll say, hey, like, you can see this many articles for free, and then please consider subscribing. If you want to view more after that, you have to do it on a subscription basis. And we're going to have to come to the realization that if you want something quality, you can't always get it for free.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with everything you just said.
I know that was long-winded, but yeah,
No,
check
no,
out
no, no.
that book.
What's it called again?
Trust Me, I'm Lying.
I'll check it out.
I'm gonna type it in the chat. Hey, do you guys have any questions? Let me scroll through these. Um, Does anyone have any resource I can find so I can learn the truth? Sam Smith. A couple resources I would recommend. Again, one, if you're paying a subscription news source, there's a much higher chance that it's gonna be reliable. Now it's getting to the point where even the biggest blogs, like I was saying, you have like TechCrunch and Salon and others, that they're getting all of their news sources from smaller. It's going all the way down to tiny micro blogs, and these micro blogs will put out stories that are picked up by a bigger one, and then that's just big enough to be picked up by another one. And so if you want a reliable news source, don't get one that's just a blog. Even some of those big ones, though, sometimes they'll be picked up by CNN, and they're trying to compete with these blogs. And so, or BBC or whatever news source is more reliable mainstream media, they're competing with these blogs now. So oftentimes they'll try to do their due diligence to check sources, but even then, a lot of times stuff slips through. But that's why there's sites like Snopes that help fact check. What's the other one? There's um, just type in Google alternative to Snopes, or if someone in the chat knows, there's like 2 or 3 fact checking ones. A lot of times, if you post a story to Facebook, they'll put if it's likely to be fake news, they'll recommend other stories that will be the exact opposite of what you just posted. But just think critically. There's a great video by Michael Shermer called The Baloney Detection Kit, where he takes certain recommendations by Carl Sagan for, filtering out some of the craziness and the conspiracy theories and the noise and finding the truth. So, Venalima says hello from Brazil. Oh, I got someone from Brazil. Where all is everyone coming from in the chat? Let us know. Also, hit that like button. That helps YouTube recommend our video.
Yeah, the more people who like this. I see there are 118 of you watching right now, so there should be no fewer than 118 thumbs up.
Or, since everyone has 2 thumbs, then technically. If only you could do 2.
Yeah.
It's like YouTube was specifically made for, amputees.
Yes. They're very socially aware in that way.
Oh, we got someone from North Carolina, someone from Ireland, James Terranov from Ireland. Got Lorway with Wings from Norway, Seattle. Damn, New Mexico, New Zealand, Washington State. We've got a pretty diverse crowd.
Jose Luis Maruca is asking, when do you guys think religions will disappear? My answer, in my honest opinion, I think never. I think that it's broadly human nature that's responsible for the existence of religion. And until all humans are gone or our nature substantially changes, I don't expect people are going to voluntarily, yeah.
Do you think that there's an evolutionary advantage to being religious? And if there was, do you think that there still is?
Sorry?
Do you think that there was an evolutionary advantage in the past that allowed religions to propagate so heavily? And if there was then, do you think that there still is now in our modern culture?
Well, even if it is the case that religion for a particular population is an evolutionary advantage, there's no guarantee that it'll go away, even after several generations. Our genes are not quite as receptive to our technological advancements as some people like to think.
Well, but mimetic evolution moves so much quicker than genetic evolution. So you take someone right now and you put them in a tribe 10,000 years ago, they'd be completely, undistinguishable from the natives. But if you take someone from then and you put them in a modern society and you raise them up in, let's say Norway, they're much more likely to be, secular, pro-science, liberal.
Perhaps that's true. But I think I've heard of studies, I may be incorrect on this, but I think I've heard of studies involving twin and adoption studies where people were placed in completely different environments and to be raised, and they ended up subscribing to the same religion, even in areas where that religion or that religious denomination is not dominant. So there may be a genetic basis to at least partially explain, a religion. But I agree with the point on memes. That point is taken.
I'd like to see that particular study.
Yeah. Don't take it with a grain of salt. I may be confusing it with another study. There have been a lot of studies like this, but yeah, from what I understand, it is at least partially genetic, possibly.
Oh yeah, and I know that obviously. So whenever someone tells me that there's absolutely no advantage whatsoever to religions, I think that even though I'm an atheist YouTuber and I rail on religion all the time and all the horrible things that it causes, I do see how it can come about in societies where if you're tribalistic and you're fighting for resources or you're trying to compete or you're trying to collaborate with another tribe, if you share that religious persuasion, that can be a huge advantage because you're able to, come together as, the Christians or the Muslims. And you no longer have to compete with each other. You have a certain amount of community, or a certain amount of collective effervescence when you're in a state of worship together or something. And so I don't think that it's entirely without its advantage. But I think that we're coming up with secular replacements and alternatives that I would like to see replace religions, but I think it's going to be a long time, if ever, that we reach that.
Yes. Bill Shirk is asking, when is my next debate? I don't have any plans, so I don't know.
KC, I want to read your publications. Spencer Whittle.
I'm gonna have to dox myself in order for that to be the case. But I will say this, and you guys might like this. My master's thesis, the topic is on chaos theory, applications of chaos theory to biophysics. So when I do get my master's degree, technically I'll be a master of chaos.
That's an awesome title.
Yeah. Nah, it's going to be Master of Physics, but I'll be able to, introduce myself to the ladies in the bar. Hi, I'm the Master of Chaos. What a Chad.
I saw there was a meme I posted earlier today, and it had, it showed Moses parting the Red Sea, and it said water, the biblical water bender, and then it had like Joshua stopping the earth, and so that the sun stays in the sky, and it says like earthbender, and then it had like Jesus is like the last airbender, and I was like, bullshit, we all know that the last airbender was Avatar.
That's pretty funny.
But bad joke, but
no, this is funny. Put a smile on my face.
Steve wants to know if you would debate Russell Humphreys. Isn't he Answers in Genesis?
Possibly. There's actually a little bit of bad blood between us. He did not like the video that I made on him, so it'll probably be it would probably be a problem.
That was an old video, wasn't it? That was the truth about creationist scientists or something.
Yeah, I kind of took a shit on his career. And
he has a career?
Well, what it was. And I don't think that conversation will be quite as productive as the one between Hovind and myself. And that one was not productive at all. So it might devolve into a shouting match.
Would you ever debate someone like Ken Ham?
Yeah. I already confronted Ray Comfort twice, which is 2 more times than anyone needs to.
In person or through social media?
No, in person. I've 2 videos of me cornering him first at Hollywood High School, where he was distributing copies of Evolution versus God, and another one at Huntington Beach, where he was just doing open air preaching with his buddies.
How did you know where he was going? Did he have it posted online? Hey, I'm going to go out here, or did you just walk up and you're like, oh my god, I know that guy?
Nah. He posted it online.
Okay. Huh. Damn, so you're taking it to the streets. I love it.
Well, not so much these days. But back in the day, I did have a short series where I would confront these open-air preachers in Santa Monica. But the guy kept shutting off the mic every time I came up to him, so that ended.
That's why you wear your own lapel, and then you post it on your YouTube.
Yeah, basically.
But yeah, so what would you say to someone who says, you can't tell that the Earth is what was it, 4.8 billion?
4.6 billion years old.
4.6 billion years old. You weren't there.
Yeah.
I can't do a Ken Ham accent.
Yeah, well, you know what, Ken Ham, I was not there when you were born. I wasn't there when your parents fucked. For all I know, Ken Ham, you hatched from an egg. So, same evidence, Ken Ham is here, different interpretation. He hatched versus he was born.
Maybe he's a reptilian.
Yeah.
Anyone, David Icke, we could go figure that out.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. What's 300 million years? Wait, what? I'm looking for some quality comments to.
Yeah, guys, ask questions. We need material.
Have you asked TMM, Steve
The mess
McRae. Have you asked the Messianic Manic about possible debates?
is a very good channel. I recommend him to people who have not subscribed.
He puts out a lot of videos.
Yeah, I'm jealous. I wish I could do that too.
His throughput is amazing, but I think one of the reasons he's able to is like he'll just put text up on the screen and read it out, and he has really good arguments. But it's a lot easier to do that than to animate videos or to do the kind of research that you're doing with yours.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't need to do research. He's a philosopher. He knows everything.
Do you think that science will replace philosophy?
No, I think that science and philosophy exist on the same spectrum and rely on one another. I don't think that philosophy is prior to science. I think that, I adopt a kind of Quinian view, where philosophy allows science to direct in a particular manner, helps orient the exact kind of concepts that science should pursue. And then when science does the investigation and does the research, the philosophers then revise their concepts in light of that empirical study. And then with this more refined concepts, they say, okay, scientists, now maybe look in this direction, look over there, do so and so.
So you're saying like the philosophy will inform the ethics boards that are approving the studies, and the study informs the philosophy that.
It's not necessarily just the ethics board. It's yeah. But they will draw from one another.
It's a much different approach than the NOMA, non-overlapping magisteria.
Yeah, I don't believe in NOMA. I think NOMA is actually kind of a problem, because it implies that philosophy is a kind of a priori. There's an a priori component to philosophy that's prior to science, and that allows people to smuggle in some theistic things. Don't accept that.
I got that a lot from my dad over the summer. Was he's very religious, and he was telling me, he's like, you believe in science, you have all this faith in science, which I made a whole video on that because I hate that argument. But he was saying that you're not utilizing the emotional side, and that there's other ways of knowing, and that someday you'll have an experience, a religious experience. I'm like, I've actually had those religious experiences. I've had that emotional state. I've had what I thought was the Holy Spirit, and I know exactly what it is now, and I've replicated it in non-religious situations, and I know how the placebo effect works, and I know the tricks of the faith healers, and I haven't seen a single one that has demonstrably proven that they cured anything besides something that was psychosomatic. But yeah, do you have a go-to answer when people say that science is just one way of knowing, and that there's other revelation-based?
Well, I'll tell them that there's a tribe in Africa that believes that if you believe hard enough, you can fly. And I would invite them to the top of a 10 or 15-story building and say, try it out. And I'll let natural selection take care of the rest.
Or if you have 20 people all go into separate rooms and have a particular problem presented to them, and have them all pray really hard about it, and ask for revelation and see if they come up with the same answers.
Yeah. Well, they're going to say, oh, he wasn't praying hard enough, or, oh, I was praying to the right guy, he was praying to the wrong guy.
Yeah. Elu Zionist says, why is it called science? Is science a social construct? The reason for that is at the beginning of the stream we were talking about how a couple videos that King Crocoduck has made, where people basically say that your social circumstances are informing the science that you come up with, and that science is different for me based on my social circumstances versus for you, and kind of debunking that idea, and looking at some of the problems that kind of mindset has caused over the years.
Yeah.
But yeah, go back to the beginning of this once we broadcast the whole thing, or once we publish it, and you can watch I definitely recommend not missing it. Any more questions, or does anyone want to join the chat? Any patrons? Anyone want to join the hangout?
And just to jump
get you in here.
Just to jump on that, the arguments for why science is supposedly the social construct that I was talking about earlier, the reasons are terrible. I mean, they are just absolutely terrible. Look at some of the articles that I post, and that's self-explanatory.
Yeah. Well, it's like there's no such thing as Asian science or black science or white science. There's just science. It works the same for me as someone in Timbuktu as it does for someone in Oslo. If, and I don't think people understand that. Like, you can perform the exact same test, the exact same experiments, and replicate them and get the same result. Mealy says, is there anything inherently wrong with teaching your kids to be religious? You want to take this one?
Is there anything inherently wrong with teaching kids to be religious? Yeah, you kill their curiosity. You make them believe that this is the truth with a capital T, and it's the end of the story. You kill their drive. So I do disagree with that.
Yeah, I did an entire video on that topic where I said, does religion kill curiosity? And there's a whole list of religious scholars and philosophers throughout history who've said to, throw away reason. And, everyone from Thomas Aquinas to Plutarch to Martin Luther have said that, curiosity is in a way a vice, and that you shouldn't ask these difficult questions. Doubting Thomas is seen as the villain. He's actually the hero. He's the one who says, whoa, some dude rose from the dead. Like, as much as I want this to be true, I'm not going to believe it until I actually, examine it, test it, perform the scientific method. And yet he's vilified. And so I think that is a huge danger with religions, is saying that, like, this you have to swallow this dogma whole, and that you cannot question or doubt. And if you do, oftentimes blasphemy is a crime in some countries. And I think 13, it might be more, countries right now, all of them Islamic, apostasy carries the death penalty. And I think that's an absolute tragedy. And I think that's why they're so far behind scientifically.
No doubt about it.
It's one of the many reasons. I know that we could open up a whole can of worms when it comes to, geopolitical situations and how they fare economically, but it certainly isn't helping anything to basically say that, rather than having the ability to question all of this stuff scientifically, that you have to, some things, you can test with science, but these ones don't you dare touch, because that's true because of revelation. It's a dangerous position.
Yes, to be honest, I can. It's poisonous to me that people would think of curiosity as a vice. I think curiosity is the highest virtue. I can't think of any virtues. There are a lot of good virtues, but a curious character is one of the best characters.
I don't know if you guys read that from here, or is it flipped backwards?
Read what?
This sign.
Oh yeah, dare to be curious. Yes.
Yeah, that's one of the mottos of Holy Koolaid is, I have, you can be free, of like cults and crazy cult like indoctrination tactics. Dare to be curious, and then don't drink the Kool-Aid.
Yes. Steve F is asking a very interesting question. He's asking, do you guys think scientism is a valid phenomenon?
No.
Well, I actually have something to say about scientism. Well, a few things, actually. First, scientism frequently has been used both by the hard left and the hard right as a snarl word. Whenever science contradicts a person's precious beliefs, or whenever people don't like that science is attempting to talk about social norms or anything like that, they accuse a person of scientism. And then there's a sense in which a person can be accused of scientism if they believe that science is synonymous with truth. But I've been thinking a lot about it lately, and I kind of feel like I want to reclaim scientism. I want to adopt the label of scientism just to piss them all off. And I want to clarify kind of my notion of what would constitute a good scientism, and maybe hear people's ideas on what this means, or on how valuable it is. So my idea of scientism, the substance of my scientism would basically be everything that we navigate the world by attempting to develop models of the world. And when we develop our models of the world, we're looking for models that have a particular set of features. We're looking for, if we want to represent the world, we want our models to be optimally flexible. They have to be flexible enough to be able to account for counterfactuals, but not so flexible that they're non-falsifiable. We want models that are efficient in their explanatory power. So, they'll employ Occam's razor where appropriate. We want models with predictive accuracy, of course. That's kind of the name of the game. And we want models whose background propositions are conciliant with the phenomena that the theory is emerging from. So we want theories of biology whose background propositions are conciliant with chemistry. We want chemistry whose background propositions are conciliant with physics. And we want physics, well, basically, the more fundamental it goes, the more conciliant it needs to be.
But isn't there's some danger, though, to using a word like that? Because they use it not only as a slur, but to basically say that, oh, you're just having faith in your religion, and your religion is science. And
yes, I don't encourage anybody to adopt this term. This is something that I was just thinking of doing just to piss off all the right people, and this would extend even to other realms. As I mentioned earlier, I think that science and philosophy exist on a spectrum, and in between the spectrum, you have what I guess you could loosely call folk theories. These unrefined hypotheses that can then be more carefully addressed by science. And it's mostly on the hard left when you talk about these folk theories and you talk about people's lived experiences and how we may potentially be able to use them to create predictive models and be able to formalize them in a manner that actually has some utility. This is when some of the worst abuses of the snarl word scientism are thrown out. Anyone who wants to talk about the naturalization of social theories will yell a lot about scientism. They'll make a lot of noise about it, and they'll accuse you of being a logical positivist. Even right now, Blue, he's asking, "Hey, Casey, is logical positivism the only way to approach the
timing
truth?"
on that.
Yes. So logical positivism is very different from post-positivism, which is what I subscribe to.
Okay, real quick, I want to thank Travis Bell. He just pledged 666 in the super chat. If you have a question, let us know, or if you want to join the conversation, we can give us a way to reach you, and we'll pull you in the hangout. So thanks for that. Now back to your question you were talking about logical positivism.
Yeah, so logical positivism employs a reductionism that is very different from that of the post-positivist. The guy who actually pointed out why the reductionism of logical positivists was wrong, his name was Willard Quine. I've mentioned him already, and he's been a very strong influence on my philosophy of science. He wrote a paper called Two Dogmas of Empiricism, criticizing the logical positivism of the time, and this was actually the last nail in the coffin of logical positivism. The previous guys who'd contributed to the destruction of positivism, one of them I already mentioned his name. He was Thomas Kuhn with The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and then the other one was Karl Popper when he introduced the concept of falsifiability. So, but Kuhn was the guy who basically buried logical positivism. And their notion of reductionism was basically individual information statements, individual nodes in these networks that I showed in my video in these theories. These have to be able to be used in all emergent phenomena. So whatever terms I'm using to describe quantum mechanics, whatever information statement I make in discussing this will eventually need to be applied at a broader scale. I have to describe fossils in terms of quantum physics, which is ridiculous. The post-positivist reductionism is one that employs inter-theoretical reduction. So it's a step-by-step process. You can describe fossils and understand them in geophysical terms, and then geophysics you can understand in thermodynamic terms, and in thermodynamics you can understand in quantum statistical terms, and quantum statistics you can understand in quantum field theory terms. So there's this kind of hierarchy of ontologies that the post-positivist admits. And this post-positivism is completely, it is completely possible, I think, to employ it in the service of the naturalization of the social sciences, naturalization of social theories. So yeah, people who will accuse me of being a logical positivist, the logical positivists have been dead and buried for like 50 years. So that's my position on that.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tongue twister.
It's a little bit.
Yeah.
I like being called pee-pee instead. Just post-positivist pee-pee, whatever.
Elu Zionist said sexism, or Jason Littleton said adding ism to a word makes it sound bad, and then Elu Zionist said sexism. Yep, it sounds bad. Sexism, racism. But what about in the world of art, like surrealism? Or I do agree that a lot of times people will say like, oh yeah, you with your evolutionism and your scientism.
Yeah, when I adopt scientism, if I adopt it, it's just going to be to piss people off. It's just going to be to annoy the people who use scientism as a snarl word.
RDE wrote, we need a scientific government, scientocracy. Sure beats the religious rule. Wouldn't that be kind of like, what wasn't it? Isn't it a plutocracy? That's where like the educated rule.
Yeah, in this context, I think it would be a technocracy.
A technocracy, yeah, would be.
Yeah. There's a danger with that, of course. Technocrats are not necessarily as competent in all fields as they fancy themselves to be.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, that's one of the things that I've kind of realized is a lot of times, just because someone has a PhD in one field doesn't mean that they know anything about any other field. And so you'll have this person has a PhD in nutritional science, and yet they're trying to, be a science correspondent on a show that's, talking about like astrobiology, and it's like, or astrophysics. It's even worse. But yeah, I've gone the opposite approach, where rather than honing in super fine on one particular topic and getting a PhD on that, I've kind of got a broad array of areas. But it's amazing as I've done that how many of those fields overlap. You'll have evolutionary biology that's also supported by geology, and it's also supported by chemistry and physics and a million other different fields that the study of genetics and whatnot.
Yes. Yeah.
Steve,
do we have any other questions in the chat?
I'm scanning them. I think we're probably gonna, unless somebody wants to join in or has a super chat or something that they want to ask a question, we always appreciate those, and it helps us keep this show running. Also, a couple quick announcements, and then we'll answer a few more questions. So type your questions in the box, and we'll get to those, and then I'll let King Crocoduck go here. But a couple quick announcements. Make sure that you check out the Science Loving Skeptics Facebook page. We have tons and tons of discussions about complex scientific stuff, the latest research, different articles, as well as memes and stuff. We try to keep it fun and 100% science-based, promoting scientific skepticism. But yeah, that's a community for like-minded, skeptically minded individuals such as your lovely selves. Also, Rachel Oates and Steve Woodford of Rationality Rules, the YouTube channel you guys know and love. The three of us are starting a podcast here February 3rd. It's going to be called the Here and How Podcast. We're going to dive into various big ideas, as well as, we're going to look at the history of how we got here. We're going to dive into scientific topics, and then we're also going to try to figure out where exactly we're going. We'll deal with everything from artificial intelligence to, what makes you, philosophical questions. We'll look at, the Big Bang and what we know about it, as well as all the different steps of abiogenesis that have been recreated in a lab. So we're gonna have a lot of fun topics, and that's coming up here in a few weeks. So go subscribe to the Here and How podcast YouTube channel. You can find it on Facebook. You can find it on Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, all over the place. Any more questions for us before we go?
By the way, everybody, do what Steve McRae is saying and share this link, this watch link, on your social media.
Let's see if gonna wrap this up. I'll answer a few more questions, but if we can get to 135 likes before the end of this video, that would be fantastic, and I would be hugely in y'all's debt. So smash that like button if you can. We got 95 watching. Let's get it to 135 likes. See if we can do it. Hit that like button. Let us know what number you were. We'll shout out a thank you. What do I think of the multiverse theory? See, I think it'd be more interesting if King Crocoduck answers that, because he's the physicist in the room.
Well, I'm interpreting multiverse theory in the context of quantum mechanics, with the many world interpretations. And I tend not to subscribe to it. I tend to favor the de Broglie-Bohm pilot wave theory, or pilot wave interpretation of quantum mechanics. This one employs non-local hidden variables, but it retains realism, and it retains what you might call stochastic determinism. So, yeah, I tend not to subscribe to the multiverse model or interpretation.
Awesome. I'm definitely
that's just my own interpretation. There's no particular advantage when it comes to which interpretation of quantum mechanics you subscribe to. In my Quantum Theory Made Easy series video, whatchamacallit, Steve is saying has global hidden variables. Non-local hidden variables. In my Quantum Theory Made Easy video series, I keep on saying over and over again, before we talk about what quantum mechanics means, we first have to understand what quantum theory says. So the video about the philosophy and the interpretations will be the last one in that series. But anyone who wants to understand sort of the basics of this theories, go check it out.
Definitely go do that. I've noticed you have people like Brian Greene on the one hand, who's very, very pro multiverse theory, and you have Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's like, hey, we still don't know you're promoting this, but we don't have any evidence for it. Do you think that that's something that we'll ever be able to test? We'll ever be able to tell? Because it seems to me like we're kind of on the cusp of being able to kind of tell or measure any kind of interactions that there may be with other universes, but is that...
I don't know. As far as I can tell, each of the interpretations carries with it some kind of philosophical black box. The Copenhagen interpretation carries with it the black box of the collapsing wave function. We don't know what the hell that means. The many worlds interpretation carries with it, of course, the black box of many universes. I don't really know how we would begin to test those interactions, or how we could even conceive of what those interactions must be like. And then for the one that I favor, the de Broglie-Bohm, the pilot wave interpretation, that one carries with it the black box of non-local hidden variables, which suffers from the same problem as the other two. So
I'm gonna have to go brush up on my understanding of physics.
Watch my series. It'll explain everything.
I watch a lot of material related to this stuff, but I've only had like maybe 3 or 4 physics courses in my life, and they were all fairly introductory.
Well, I'm told that my Quantum Theory Made Easy series are very whatchamacallit, they're very easy to grasp. Just even by people who just took basic algebra. That's who it's aimed at. So.
Okay. What do you think about people who say, was it Richard Feynman that's so often quote mined for saying, if you think that you understand quantum theory, you don't understand quantum theory?
Yeah.
I feel like that quote is taken out of context a lot.
It is. A lot of people will post my quantum theory videos. If you think you understand, it's like, shut up, dude. It's like the person who made this video didn't understand the first lesson of quantum mechanics. If you think you understand it, it's just like, no, shut up. That's not what he meant. The guy helped contribute to quantum field theory and helped found the whole discipline.
Well, the entire field of computing is based upon quantum mechanics, and so if we understand how this works, we understand exactly to a fine-grained level, to the point where we're able to engineer instruments that rely entirely on it, and they're reliable. we just don't necessarily understand all of the intricate details as to why certain things are behaving a particular way. Is that a correct interpretation?
Yes, yes, it has astonishing predictive accuracy. In fact, there is no theory that is more accurate in its predictions than quantum field theory.
It just sounds complicated, so Deepak can throw out the word, quantum every other word, and people think he sounds smart.
Yes, I believe. Don't quote me on this, but they were able to accurately predict with quantum mechanics. I think the fine structure constant, or one of the constants associated with it, to something like 9 decimal places. Um, that that's fucking insane. There's no theory that comes even close when it comes to predictive accuracy.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
See,
and
that's
of
one of
course,
the things that's so cool about science that like people don't understand is like, we run these experiments, but then like we can predict shit and we can like build things based off of these theories and we can, test them and then like stuff comes true. And it's like in no other field can you do that. You can't go into a room and pray I was supposed to put this here and do that. And then all of a sudden you have a rocket on the moon. No, like you didn't get, Curiosity didn't land on Mars because they said 1,000 Hail Marys.
yeah, yeah. And if we didn't understand quantum mechanics, like you said, we wouldn't have digital technology. If you don't have quantum mechanics, then you don't understand electron tunneling. If you don't understand electron tunneling, then you don't have PN junctions or transistors. If you don't have transistors, you don't have digital technology. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. Well, and now we're getting into qubits and quantum computing.
Yeah,
which is fun.
That is a whole other can of worms that I am not ready for tonight.
See, that field is more my bitch because I worked as a network administrator and I did internet security, and I have a lot of background in like web development and IT. And to anyone wondering, no, quantum computing will not destroy the field of cryptography or, it's like,
No.
yeah, we'll be able to crack stuff faster, but they don't understand the nature of exponentially increasing the rate that the encryption level of something.
One of the
like
guys.
you can literally go from assuming that Moore's law continues at its current rate. You can go from now until the heat death of the universe, and you can still be attempting to brute force attack a particular password and not be able to if it's encrypted properly. But
yeah. Fun fact: one of the guys who helped develop the field of quantum computing, his name is Dirk Boomeister. He won the Spinoza Award for physics in 2014. He was actually the first physics professor I ever had, and he taught me one of my quantum mechanics courses. And he was really big into quantum cryptography. His team became famous for teleporting some kind of particle across the English Channel. So, and then he taught us a little bit of quantum cryptography once we finished with the book we were learning. So that was pretty cool.
I think what a lot of people don't understand is even if quantum computing made computers fast enough to where they could, decrypt a password through some type of brute force attack, it's not going to change the fact that we can update our encryption algorithms. We can upgrade the standard. So we can use quantum computing to encrypt something, and it's always faster going in that direction than trying to go the other way.
Yes.
So,
although quantum cryptography, I believe, I may not be correct, but I believe if you encrypt something with quantum cryptography, it's impossible to break.
I mean, even what we're using right now, your chance of breaking it through brute force if it's implemented correctly. And again, I say if it's implemented correctly because you look at like what the NSA was doing. That was revealed in the Snowden leaks and stuff, and like they're not trying to brute force this stuff. They have the fastest computers in the world, and they know that this shit's unbreakable. The FBI had a couple cases where they tried to get into a computer that was encrypted using TrueCrypt, and they weren't able to brute force that shit because it's too, like, they'd be sitting here until the universe died. And what they do instead with like Prism and some of these programs is they literally, this was one of the awesomest, most hilarious things I've ever seen, but in the documents there was like a leaked Post-it note, and all it said, it had like the internet like pipeline, if you will, and it was basically like you had Google servers, and it said information is decrypted here, and then it had like we're set up right here, and they like were literally right on the other side of the decryption process and just completely bypassing it altogether. And I'm like, if there's a back door, you know, it's like, why on earth would you try to break through a steel door if you can go through a window? But
let me answer one more question from the comments before we wrap up. Yeah.
yeah, go for it.
So Colin Fields is asking, Casey, as someone who studies physics, do you believe that quote-unquote soft sciences such as human psychology or even economics can one day be accurately understood in terms of basic physical print interactions? And I'm glad to see that he uses the word soft in scare quotes, because I don't believe that there's really a distinction between soft and hard science. I think it's much more useful to think of a distinction between good science and bad science. A distinction under which things like human psychology and economics are perfectly capable of being good sciences. I don't think it'll be understood in terms of basic physical interactions. That's what the logical positivists were going for. But I'm a post-positivist. I think that these things can be understood in terms of the phenomena that they're emerging from, in terms of whatever their background propositions are associated with. It will have a naturalistic base, I think. And that naturalistic base will be ultimately reducible to basic physical phenomena, but it's not. You're not going to be able to sort of transfer these identical terms up this kind of ladder. You know, these theories are kind of they've got to be holistically intertwined. But it will be good science, I think.
We apparently have God in our chat. God says, "Never understand, always overstand." That sounds kind of like a
very wise words. I don't know what they mean, but I'm sure they're wise.
It sounds like one of those truisms, or
yes,
a Deepacism. There's a website that will generate Deepak quotes, Deepak Chopra.
Yeah, it's a favorite of mine.
Yeah. Anyways, I think we're about to wrap it up. Guys, please go subscribe to King Crocoduck and check out his videos that we mentioned earlier on. I'll have links in the description, as well as the Here and How podcast, thehereandhow.com. And we'd love it if you guys could support us on Patreon. It allows us to keep making these videos, to keep bringing excellent quality content to you guys. And if you're one of my patrons, then each month I'm going to bring an interesting guest on, and you have a chance to join in the hangout and actually participate and have a conversation with us. And, you know, how fun is that? Like, how would you like me to bring, I don't know, Neil deGrasse Tyson or Sam Harris or someone in? I'd have to get a lot bigger in order to get there. But if I have enough patrons and I can start advertising more, my channel will eventually reach that size. So like, share, subscribe, donate, go check out King Crocoduck's work. It's been fantastic having you here today, man.
Thanks for having me. It was a good talk.
It's been a pleasure. Take care, guys, and don't drink the Kool-Aid.